In one of the most haunting episodes of the original Star Trek series, the crew of the Enterprise beams down to an ill-fated planet and finds themselves trapped in a cosmic laboratory by two aliens, the Vians. There, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy meet another prisoner, Jem. Jem is a mute woman who can feel and absorb the pain of others, to the point of risking her life to heal them. The Vians torture the crew to test Jem, cruelly wondering if her species, all literal empaths, is capable of what the Vians mistakenly perceive as true empathy, the willingness to sacrifice one's own welfare, perhaps one's life, for the sake of another. The Vians torture McCoy to the brink of death. Jem touches McCoy's face and willingly begins to die for him, a complete stranger. But McCoy stops her. Kirk and Spock break free from this little prism thing they're trapped in, and confronting the Vians, Kirk remarks they are all intellect and no compassion. Star Trek was never particularly subtle. The empath remains a brilliant, challenging teleplay. Watching Jem's face contort into silent, painful screams as her body endures the physical wounds the Vians inflict on the Enterprise crew makes it impossible not to reflect on what it accurately means to be empathic. Because of its depiction of torture, the episode was actually banned by the BBC until 1994. I first watched The Empath as a kid when it was in reruns in the heyday of broadcast television. I'd sprawl out on the living room floor at the TV's old flickering cathode ray glow illuminating the entire living room. I was only around 10 or so, but I was old enough to be haunted by Jem's absorbing someone else's pain, but not old enough to really understand why it unsettled me so deeply that it stuck with me for 50 years. I don't think it's because of the aliens or the melodrama. Maybe it's a little bit because of the aliens and the melodrama. But really, it's because it posed questions with which I continue to wrestle. Mainly, what does it practically mean to be empathic? And is it even possible without also being racist? I've seen empathy defined many different ways, but the concept is usually reduced to a mental exercise, as if closing your eyes and pretending you're in someone else's shoes somehow makes you empathetic. Now, I don't know what's going on in this poster, but to me it looks a lot more like a Folgers commercial than empathy. That's a problem, because this ad is typical of the way people define empathy. The American Humanistic Association defines empathy as, quote, entering imaginatively into another's situation in an attempt to understand their experience as though we're experiencing it ourselves. I have to tell you, that sounds a lot like method acting. You know what method acting is? Method actors take on a role so seriously that they live the persona of the character they're playing. Marlon Brando was a very famous method actor. Jared Leto is another one. And it's debatable whether the method is a legitimate form of acting or just a way for pompous, self-inflated egoists to draw more attention to themselves. Me? I'm skeptical that it's possible to assume we can experience someone else's suffering without genuinely living it. The idea smacks of condescension and bigotry, and I don't find it particularly helpful. Buddhists call this well-meaning but misguided thinking idiot compassion. When we rush to relieve someone's pain so we can feel better about ourselves, when we're nice even when we shouldn't be, we harm or silence the real story that needs to be told. Buddhism implicitly questions whether we can ever fully occupy another's interior world and instead emphasizes developing a disciplined presence, staying with another's suffering without assuming we are that person or know at all the full weight of their situation. In practice, this often appears less like I feel exactly like you feel and more like I'm here, listening, without denial or rescue. Other faiths echo this caution. The Torah doesn't ask us to claim another's suffering as our own. It asks us to remember our collective human history of pain and let that memory guide us toward justice. The Quran describes empathy as mercy and justice, insisting that genuine compassion means listening to people's stories and then changing the systems that hurt them, not just offering sympathy from a comfortable distance. The more I wrestle with what empathy is, and if it's possible to be honestly empathetic, the more I see how easily it can slip from solidarity into presumption. It's tempting to believe we can fully inhabit another's experience, but that fantasy can blind us to the messy, uncomfortable truth. Some suffering is simply not ours to claim. Scholars like Renita Weems argue that calls for universal empathy often mask a refusal to confront specific harms, for example, those faced by black women. The goal, she says, is not to feel my pain, but to heed my voice and then change the conditions causing the pain. Practically speaking, one of my heroes, Latin American theologian Gustavo Gutierrez, stresses accompaniment, walking with the oppressed, not speaking over them. He says that genuine accompaniment begins by hearing how people name their own reality, not focusing on the helper's assessment of the situation. The truth is, I don't know how you feel. I can listen, I can stand with you, and I will fight to change the systemic conditions that cause suffering, but I can't, and I need to recognize that I shouldn't, pretend to embody your story. These days, I see Star Trek's Empath episode as a cautionary tale about what not to do. We're not to take on someone else's wounds, but simply to be there with them while they heal. Empathy isn't about play acting, pretending someone else's suffering is ours, or making ourselves the hero of another person's narrative. It's about showing up, shutting up, letting those most affected define what help looks like, and then accompanying them on their journey. Amen. Our question to consider for discussion today is, how can we move beyond imagining another's pain and instead show up in ways that truly support their needs? How can we move beyond imagining another's pain and instead show up in ways that truly are supportive? Let's take a minute and a half or so just to silently ponder that, and then we'll open up the big room for discussion.